Hello, economic thrill seekers, and welcome back to Boss Economics World, your one-stop shop for dissecting the glorious mess that is global finance, trade, and government mismanagement. I'm your host, the guy who yells at policymakers so you don't have to, and today, oh boy, do we have a doozy of a story to unpack. Buckle up, because we're diving headfirst into the latest chapter of the Trump tariff tantrum, Liberation Day Tariffs, and how it's turning the global economy into a geopolitical piñata. And guess what, folks? The UK is somehow getting the VIP treatment in this economic Hunger Games, while the rest of the world gets whacked with the tariff stick. But don't worry, I'm here to break it all down, from the surface-level chaos to the deep, dark underbelly of economic mismanagement. Let's get into it. Let's start with the surface-level drama, shall we? Donald Trump, the self-proclaimed tariff man, has unleashed his latest economic weapon, a shiny new set of Liberation Day tariffs on America's trading partners. And oh, what a liberation it is, liberating markets into a tailspin, liberating global trade into chaos, and liberating central bankers into a cold sweat. But here's the kicker, while most countries are getting slapped with tariffs that make their exports as competitive as a horse-drawn buggy in a Formula One race, the UK is getting the red carpet treatment. A measly 10% tariff on British goods, the lowest rate on the block, while China is choking on a 34% tariff, the EU is wincing at 20%, and Southeast Asian exporters are basically waving the white flag. Now, before you start thinking this is some grand act of Anglo-American friendship, let's be real. This isn't about Trump and Prime Minister Keir Starmer exchanging friendship bracelets. No, this is about Trump's obsession with winning at trade, even if it means setting the global economy on fire and handing out marshmallows to his favorite allies. And, of course, it's about the UK government gleefully rubbing its hands together, thinking it stumbled into a golden ticket while the rest of the world burns. But here at Boss Economics World, we don't just swallow the headlines, we dissect them, layer by layer, to expose the economic carnage and governmental incompetence lurking beneath. So, let's dig in. On the surface, the story sounds like a win for the UK. Economists and trade experts are practically tripping over themselves to tell us how this 10% tariff gives British firms a competitive advantage. Take David Wayne, managing director of Conmec, a steel engineering firm in northwest England, who told BBC Radio on April 3, 2025, that this tariff structure is basically a golden opportunity. Why? Because Conmec's products are now cheaper in the US market compared to their overseas rivals, who are getting hit with tariffs that make their goods as affordable as a diamond-encrusted toaster. And then there's Alan Winters, a trade expert from the University of Sussex, who's out here saying, if someone hits your rivals harder than they hit you, you get a competitive advantage. Gee, thanks, Captain Obvious. The Sussex Centre for Inclusive Trade Policy even crunched the numbers and estimated that the UK might only lose 0.1% to 0.3% of GDP from this trade war, practically a rounding error compared to the US, which is apparently set to suffer more than any other country, from its own brilliant plan. And if the UK can strike a trade deal with the US, it might even gain 0.1% of GDP. Wow, a whole 0.1%. Someone call the champagne delivery service. But here's where the satire kicks in, folks. Are we really celebrating the fact that the UK is the least beaten-up kid on the trade war playground? Is this what economic success looks like in 2025, bragging about losing slightly less than everyone else? This is like celebrating a participation trophy in the middle of an economic apocalypse. And let's not forget, this so-called advantage is entirely dependent on the whims of a US administration that's about as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. But hey, at least the UK government is in a good position to negotiate further tariff reductions, right? Because nothing screams economic stability like begging for mercy from a guy who thinks tariffs are a beautiful way to fix the economy. Now, let's peel back the layers and look at the bigger picture, because this isn't just a story about the UK getting a backstage pass to Trump's trade war circus. This is a story about how government mismanagement, on both sides of the Atlantic, is driving the global economy straight into a ditch. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, has already sounded the alarm, warning of a significant risk to the world economy from this tariff tantrum. And Bloomberg Economics? They've estimated that the direct impact of these tariffs on UK exports could knock as much as 0.4% off GDP. Sure, that's not a catastrophe, but it's not exactly a cause for celebration either, especially when you consider the ripple effects. Here's the real kicker, Trump's tariffs aren't just hurting US trading partners, they're backfiring on the US itself. According to the Sussex Center's paper, the US is set to suffer more than any other country from its own measures. Why? Because tariffs don't magically build up domestic industry overnight, as Trump seems to think. They disrupt supply chains, raise costs for consumers, and spark retaliation from other countries. Just look at China, which is already hitting back with a 34% tariff on US goods. And the EU? They're not exactly rolling over either, expect retaliatory tariffs on US exports like agriculture and tech, which will hit American businesses where it hurts. But let's bring in some fresh data to really hammer this home. According to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Trump's first round of tariffs in 2018 cost American consumers and businesses an estimated $40 billion annually in higher prices. Fast forward to 2025, and the Peterson Institute for International Economics, PIIE, projects that the new Liberation Day tariffs could shave up to 1.5% off U.S. GDP by 2027 if the trade war escalates. That's not winning, folks, that's economic self-sabotage. And yet, here we are, with the UK government acting like it's found a lifeboat in the middle of this Titanic-level disaster. Now, let's get to the heart of the matter, because this is where Boss Economics World shines, calling out the government mismanagement that's turning a bad situation into a full-blown crisis. First, let's talk about the US government. Trump's tariff strategy is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how modern economies work. Tariffs aren't a magic wand that brings back manufacturing jobs, they're a sledgehammer that smashes global supply chains, raises costs, and fuels inflation. Just look at the data. According to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, the 2018 tariffs increased U.S. consumer prices by 0.4% and cost the average American household $419 per year. And that was before the Liberation Day tariffs kicked in, which are even broader and more aggressive. But it's not just Trump's fault. Oh no, the UK government deserves a starring role in this economic horror show too. Sure, they're touting their competitive advantage and cozying up to the US for a trade deal, but what's their long-term plan here? Are they really betting the UK's economic future on a preferential tariff rate that could vanish the moment Trump's mood changes? And let's not forget, the UK is still reeling from the economic fallout of Brexit, which has already cost the country an estimated 4% of GDP, according to the Office for Budget Responsibility, OBR. Instead of addressing structural issues, like declining productivity, underinvestment in infrastructure, and a shrinking labor force, the UK government is chasing short-term wins in a trade war it didn't even start. Here's a spicy example to drive the point home. The UK government is reportedly considering dropping its digital services tax on US tech giants like Google and Amazon to sweeten a trade deal. Really? In 2024, that tax brought in £500 million in revenue, according to HM Revenue and Customs, and it's projected to rise to £700 million by 2026. Scrapping it might make Trump happy, but it's a slap in the face to UK taxpayers who are already dealing with a cost of living crisis. This is what happens when governments prioritize political optics over economic fundamentals, short-term gains, long-term pain. So, why should you, the ordinary viewer who's just trying to pay your bills, or you, the finance professional who's crunching numbers in a cubicle, care about this tariff drama? Because this is a textbook example of how government mismanagement can tank the economy, and your wallet. For the average person, tariffs mean higher prices, lower living standards, and more uncertainty. For finance professionals, it means market volatility, disrupted supply chains, and a whole lot of sleepless nights trying to predict what Trump will tweet next. But here's the real zinger, the UK's so-called advantage is a mirage. Sure, lower tariffs might boost exports to the US in the short term, but what happens when the global economy tanks because of this trade war? The IMF has already warned that a full-blown escalation could cut global GDP growth by 0.8% in 2026. And guess what? The UK, with its open, trade-dependent economy, is not immune to that kind of shock. And let's not forget the Bank of England, which is now under pressure to cut interest rates 3 times in 2025, up from an earlier forecast of 2, according to market expectations. On the surface, that sounds great, cheaper borrowing, lower mortgage rates, hooray. But dig deeper, and it's a sign of desperation. The BOE is trying to offset the economic fallout of this trade war, but rate cuts alone can't fix structural problems. Just look at Japan, which has been stuck in a low-growth, low-interest rate trap for decades. Is that the future the UK government wants? Here's the bottom line, folks, this tariff tantrum is a masterclass in economic mismanagement, and both the US and UK governments are failing the test. Trump's tariffs are a reckless gamble that's hurting his own economy more than anyone else's, and the UK government's response, chasing short-term trade deals while ignoring long-term challenges, is like putting a band-aid on a broken leg. So, what can we do? For the average viewer, it's time to hold your government accountable. Demand policies that prioritize sustainable growth, not political stunts. For finance professionals, it's time to get loud, use your expertise to call out bad policy and advocate for solutions that actually work. And for everyone, it's time to wake up to the fact that the global economy is not a game of Monopoly, it's a complex system that requires competence, not chaos. That's all for today's episode of Boss Economics World. If you're as fed up with this economic clown show as I am, smash that like button, subscribe, and leave a comment below telling me how you think governments should fix this mess. Until next time, keep your wallets close and your skepticism closer. See ya.